In the middle of a blinding Minnesota snowstorm, dozens of people searched for hours. They followed their grids, checked every sector, and finally marked one cold word on the map: clear. No one knew that just yards away, beneath the drifting snow, a little girl lay curled in silence, whispering an apology she believed was her last. The wind had erased every footprint. The rules said the area was empty. But a K9 didn't trust the map, and by instinct alone, that dog found what an entire search team had missed. The storm had taken the city's edges first, then its streets, then its scents. In Duluth, Minnesota, the wind didn't just blow, it hunted. It slid between bare trees like a living thing and turned the lakefront park into a white room with no doors. Snow packed itself into every crease of the world, erasing tire tracks, swallowing footprints, making the familiar feel strange and far away. Staff Sergeant Jake Carter kept his chin tucked down inside his collar and his shoulders square, the way you do when you've learned that weather doesn't care about your plans. The Marines had trained him to push forward when your body wanted to stop, to keep moving when your mind begged for warmth and rest. But this wasn't some overseas desert. This was home soil, and the cold was a different kind of enemy, quiet and patient. At his left, a German shepherd moved like a shadow in the blowing white. Rex, not a mascot, not a pet, not an accessory. A working dog with a steady gait and a nose that could pull truth out of the air. Rex's harness straps were iced at the edges. Snow had clung to his muzzle, melting and freezing again, as if the storm was trying to claim him too. But his eyes stayed clear, alert, unbothered. The search team was already tired. They were a mix of local officers, volunteer firefighters, a couple of rangers, and civilians who had shown up with good intentions and bright headlamps. Their faces were wrapped in scarves, and their voices sounded small under the roar. Every so often, a radio crackled with broken sentences and half-heard coordinates. Grid C7, repeat, visibility dropping. Command says we pull in 20, not safe. Jake stayed close enough to the line to respect the plan, but not so close he couldn't read the body language around him. People in cold weather weren't just cold. They got narrow. They got impatient. They got afraid of being the one who made a wrong call. And tonight, everyone wanted a clean ending, a checked box, a sense that they'd done what they could. The team leader, Officer Mark Hensley, raised his arm and shouted through the wind. "Clear it and move! We've swept this section twice." A few volunteers nodded like they were grateful to hear it. A ranger held up a tablet in a waterproof case, squinting at the screen as snow slapped his gloves. "We're done here. We're done. We can't stay out." Jake heard the word done and felt something tighten in his chest, not because he wanted to argue, because he'd learned the hard way that done was often what people said when they were scared of what might still be true. Rex had been walking steady for nearly an hour, checking the wind, circling back, then moving forward again. But as Hensley signaled the team to shift to the next block of the park, Rex slowed. At first it looked like fatigue, a pause to catch breath. But Rex wasn't panting. He wasn't lagging. He wasn't looking at Jake for permission. He stopped the way a soldier stops when something changes in the air. Rex's ears lifted, sharp and forward. His body stiffened, not in panic, but in attention. His nose tilted up into the gusts, and then his head angled slightly to the right, toward a line of trees that disappeared into the white. Jake felt the leash go firm in his glove. "Rex," Jake said low, close to the dog's ear. "What do you have?" The wind took the words and shredded them. Rex didn't look back. Hensley turned, saw them paused, and stomped over, boots punching into the snow. "Carter, keep him moving. We're rotating out." Jake glanced at the others. A few faces were already turned away. They'd heard the order, and they were holding on to it like a lifeline. "He's indicating," Jake said. Hensley's jaw worked as if he was chewing on his patience. "Your dog's cold like the rest of us. This area is clear. We can't have you freelancing out here." Jake didn't like the word freelancing. It made it sound reckless, like ego, like he was trying to be a hero. He wasn't. He'd seen what happened when people needed a hero, and all they got was paperwork. Rex took one step forward, the leash tugging, then stopped again. The movement wasn't random. It was deliberate, a pull with a direction. Jake's heart began to hammer, not from exertion, but from instinct of his own. You learn, if you survive enough, that there are moments when your gut speaks quietly, and if you ignore it, you'll hear it screaming later. "Mark," Jake said, keeping his voice calm. "Give me 2 minutes. If he's wrong, we rejoin. If he's right—" Hensley stared at him, snow collecting on his eyebrows. 2 minutes and you're back in line. You go off course, and I'm writing it up." Jake nodded once. He'd had worse written about him in his life than a note on a stormy night. Rex started forward the moment Jake gave him slack. They moved away from the others, just far enough that the headlamps became blurred halos behind the veil of snow. The lake was somewhere to their left, unseen but felt, the kind of dark presence that made the air colder. Rex kept his nose high for several seconds, then dropped it low and began to cut a path with his chest, pushing into drifts that reached Jake's knees. Jake followed, boots sinking, each step a fight. He kept his eyes on Rex's shoulders, on the twitch of ears, on the rhythm of movement. Working dogs had a language that didn't need words. Rex's wasn't frantic, it was certain. A bench appeared out of nowhere, half buried, the metal arm coated in ice. Jake's mind flicked briefly to the normal summer days that Bench had witnessed. Couples, kids, people feeding gulls. That was the cruelty of it. The park looked harmless in daylight. Tonight it looked like a grave. Rex passed the bench without hesitation. He angled toward a low stand of trees near a service path that should have been visible, but wasn't. Snow had erased the path the way it erases mistakes, the way it erases evidence. Jake's radio crackled. Hensley's voice broke through. "Carter, report." Jake brought the mic to his mouth. "Dog is tracking. I'm still within the search zone." "Within the zone," Hensley repeated, and Jake could hear the edge. "Don't make me come get you." The radio fizzled, then went dead. Rex slowed again near the first tree line. He did something Jake had never seen him do on a training exercise. He didn't sniff the ground in short bursts. He lifted his nose, then turned his head into the wind as if tasting the air, then took 3 quick steps and stopped. It looked like listening. Jake's stomach tightened. In the Marines, you learn to respect silence because silence can mean someone is watching you. Out here, silence meant something else. It meant someone might be too cold to make noise. Rex's paws began to scrape at the snow near the base of a young spruce, shallow at first, then with more urgency. Snow flew back in small sprays. Rex paused, sniffed, scraped again. Jake crouched, using his gloved hands to pull away the loose snow. His fingers hit something different. Not bark, not rock. Fabric. It was small. A child's glove, bright against the white. The kind you lose on the way to school and don't even realize until you're inside. Except this glove had a crust of ice on it, and it was wedged under a branch like it had been ripped away by wind or by panic. Jake's throat went dry. A second object appeared when Rex scraped again. A strip of knitted scarf, yellow, the color of a school bus, the color of warning. It was caught on a twig, fluttering like a flag that couldn't surrender. Jake stood up, the wind punching him in the chest, and looked around. The world was blank. No tracks, no shadows, no signs of a child. Just the glove and the scarf and a dog that refused to be wrong. Jake pressed the radio button again. "Command, this is Carter. I have possible child clothing items." "Repeat." Possible child clothing items. Dog indicates nearby. Only static answered him, then a distant, broken voice that might have been a reply or might have been the storm playing tricks. Rex stopped scraping and lifted his head. His ears angled toward something Jake couldn't see. His body shifted, weight moving forward, the leash pulling. And then Rex did the one thing that made Jake's blood turn cold. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He simply pulled hard, straight ahead, toward a rounded rise of snow that looked like every other drift, except for one detail Jake could barely make out through the blowing white. A shallow dip, like something beneath it, had settled. Rex planted his paws and stared at it as if he could see through the snow. Jake felt the leash tremble with the dog's focus. The search team had called this area clear. Jake took one step forward, then another, and the storm swallowed the sound of his own breath. He knelt beside Rex and reached out, fingers shaking despite himself, to touch the drift. It wasn't just snow. It was soft, packed in a way that suggested weight underneath. Rex pressed closer, nose near the surface, and exhaled. Jake's mind flashed through everything that could be true, and every version of it felt unbearable. He looked back once, toward where the team's lights had been. He couldn't see them now. He couldn't even see the bench anymore. The world had narrowed to one dog, one drift, and the knowledge that if he was right, they were already late. Jake braced his hands in the snow and began to dig. Jake dug with his hands until his fingers burned, then dug harder. Snow packed itself into his sleeves and melted against his wrists, the cold biting deep, but he barely felt it. Rex scraped beside him, fast and focused, never once stepping on the spot Jake was clearing, as if he knew exactly where not to touch. The drift came apart in layers, each one heavier than the last, until Jake's glove brushed something that made his stomach drop. A sleeve, pink, thin. "Rex," Jake said, his voice coming out rough. "Easy." He cleared faster, panic rising, and then the shape beneath the snow revealed itself. A small shoulder, a hunched back, a child folded inward like she was trying to disappear into herself. Her hair was stiff with ice, lashes white with frost. For one terrible second, Jake thought she wasn't breathing at all. Then he saw it, the faintest rise in her chest. "Oh, God," he breathed, and the words felt like they didn't belong to him, like they'd been dragged out by fear instead of faith. Rex pressed his body against the girl immediately, curling along her side, his chest heaving warmth into her frozen back. He didn't wait for a command. He never did when it mattered most. Jake slid an arm beneath the child's shoulders, brushing snow from her face with shaking fingers. "Hey," he said softly, leaning close so his voice could cut through the wind. "Hey, sweetheart, you're not alone." Her eyelids fluttered, barely lifting. Her lips moved, stiff and blue, forming words that were more breath than sound. They said nobody would come. The sentence hit Jake harder than the cold. Not a cry for help, not a scream, a conclusion. The kind only a child could reach when she'd run out of hope before she ran out of breath. "I'm here," Jake said, forcing strength into his voice. "I'm right here. You hear me?" He shrugged out of his outer jacket, ignoring the way the wind cut through him the moment it was gone, and wrapped it around her small body. Rex stayed pressed tight, a living barrier between her and the storm. The girl's teeth chattered weakly, then stopped, and that terrified Jake more than the shaking ever could. He brought his radio up again. "Command, this is Carter. I have a live child. Repeat, live child, approximate age 9, severe hypothermia. We need medical support now." Static answered him, thick and unhelpful. Somewhere far away, a voice crackled, broken by interference, then vanished. Jake looked up, scanning the white void. The team was gone. The headlamps, the voices, the illusion of safety, all of it erased by snow and distance. He realized with a slow, sinking certainty that if he waited here for backup, the storm would win. "Okay," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Okay, we're moving." He lifted the girl carefully, her weight lighter than it should have been, her head lolling against his chest. She felt like she might slip through his arms if he didn't hold tight enough. Rex rose and took position immediately, pacing a few steps ahead, stopping, then looking back to make sure Jake followed. Jake turned, expecting to see the bench, the path, some familiar marker to guide them back. There was nothing. The snow had swallowed every trace of where they'd come from. No footprints, no outline of a trail. Even the trees looked different now, their shapes blurred and bent by the storm. The wind shifted, howling from a new direction, driving ice into Jake's face until his eyes watered. "We'll go back the way we came," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. Rex led, cutting a narrow channel through the drifts, then stopped abruptly. He circled once, twice, then looked back at Jake, ears high. He was confused, not lost, but uncertain. Jake's pulse kicked up. He knew that look. The terrain had changed too much. The wind had erased the scent trail they'd followed in. Going back meant guessing. The girl stirred in his arms. Her eyes opened a sliver, unfocused. "I'm cold," she whispered, the words trembling. "I know," Jake said, tightening his hold. "I know. Stay with me." He looked around again, searching for anything solid to anchor them. To the left, he could sense the lake, a vast unseen presence, the air colder there, heavier. To the right, a darker line hinted at trees, and maybe, if luck was on their side, a service path. Rex suddenly turned and started forward with purpose, angling away from where they'd come from. "Rex," Jake said sharply. "Heel." Rex didn't stop. That was the moment Jake understood how alone they really were. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a search grid with boundaries and check-ins. This was a decision, and every decision carried weight. If Rex was wrong, they could wander until the yacht stage. Cold took all three of them. If Rex was right, it might be the only chance they had. Jake thought of the words the girl had whispered. Nobody would come. He adjusted his grip, feeling her weak heartbeat against his chest. "All right," he said to Rex, voice low and steady. "Show me." They moved toward the edge of the park, away from the cleared zone, away from the comfort of procedure. Snow stung Jake's exposed skin, his breath coming out in sharp bursts. His legs began to burn as the drifts deepened, each step a test of balance. Rex slowed, checked the air again, then pressed on, nose low now, weaving slightly as if following something only he could sense. Jake followed, trusting muscle memory, trusting the dog, trusting that instinct had a place when maps failed. After several minutes that felt like hours, Rex stopped again. He lifted his head and barked once, sharp and urgent, then trotted ahead a few steps and waited. Jake pushed forward, heart hammering, and then he saw it. A dark line cutting through the white. Steel rails, half buried, running straight and true into the distance. An old rail spur, abandoned years ago, but still there, still real. A path. Relief surged through him so fast it almost made his knees give out. Rails meant direction. Rails meant they weren't spinning in circles. "Good boy," Jake said hoarsely. "Good boy." He stepped onto the packed snow between the rails, adjusting his footing. The girl whimpered softly, her fingers clutching weakly at his shirt. Rex took position again, just ahead, guiding them along the line of steel. The wind screamed across the open stretch, stronger here, unhindered by trees. Snow whipped around them in blinding sheets. Jake lowered his head and leaned into it, every step a fight. Behind them, somewhere in the storm, the search teams continued their sweep, following their grids, trusting their maps. Ahead of them, a Marine, a dog, and a child moved forward on nothing but instinct and stubborn will, racing against a cold that did not forgive mistakes. And the storm, indifferent and endless, closed in around them. The rails gave them something the storm couldn't erase. Even half buried, the steel ran straight as a promise, 2 dark lines cutting through the white. Jake kept his boots between them, stepping where the snow was packed harder, where the wind had scoured the surface down to a crust. Rex moved ahead with his head low, then lifted it every few yards, tasting the air like he was reading a language Jake couldn't learn fast enough. Mia's breathing was shallow against Jake's chest, not the steady, sleepy kind, the weak kind. Her body felt too light in his arms, as if the cold had taken weight from her bones. "Stay with me, Mia," Jake said, forcing her name into the world like it could anchor her. He didn't know if she could hear him. He only knew he couldn't afford silence. Her eyelids fluttered. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Those 2 words slid under Jake's ribs like a knife. Children didn't apologize to storms. They apologized to people. "You don't need to be sorry," he told her, even though his voice shook. "You did what you had to do. Just keep your eyes open." Rex barked once, sharp, and looked back, as if warning Jake not to waste breath. Jake understood. The dog didn't care about speeches. The dog cared about distance, minutes, warmth. The wind slammed into them again, so hard it rocked Jake's balance. Snow stung his face like grit. He tightened his grip around Mia and lowered his shoulder, leaning into the gust like he was pushing against a door that wouldn't open. They passed a bent signpost that might once have marked a trail crossing. Now it was just a crooked shape with no meaning. Beyond it, the world was only gray and white, the horizon erased. Jake's radio crackled faintly and then went dead again, like it was drowning. He tried anyway. "Command, this is Carter. I'm on the old rail spur moving south toward any structure. I have the child. She's alive but fading. I need medics staged." Static. A faint pop, nothing else. Jake swallowed. He had been alone in worse places, but never with a child in his arms and a city's worth of people somewhere behind him, searching the wrong square because a map said they should. Mia shivered once, a violent tremor that ran through her small frame. Then, just as suddenly, she went still. The stillness terrified him. Shivering meant the body was fighting. Stillness meant the body was losing. "Hey," Jake said, louder now. "No, Mia, talk to me." Her lips barely moved. "So tired." "I know," he said, "but you can rest later. Not now." Rex slowed and circled back, pressing his shoulder against Jake's leg, steadying him. For a second, the dog's warmth bled through the layers of Jake's pants. Rex's eyes lifted to Mia's face, and the dog made a low sound, not a growl, not a whine, something in between, a sound like worry. Jake shifted Mia slightly, trying to tuck her deeper into his jacket. As he adjusted her, his hand brushed the pocket of her coat. The fabric was stiff with ice, but he felt something inside, folded tight. A thought flashed through him, fast and guilty. Evidence. Identification. Anything to tell them who she was, where she belonged, who would be waiting if they made it out. He slid 2 fingers into the pocket carefully and pulled out a small wad of paper, soaked and half frozen. It clung to his glove. He brought it closer to his chest, shielding it from the wind, and unfolded it with stiff hands. The writing was shaky, as if done in a hurry. Letters bled and smeared, but the words were clear enough. "I'm sorry." No name, no explanation. Just that. Jake stared at it longer than he should have, his throat tightening. The paper didn't feel like a child's random doodle. It felt like a goodbye. "Mia?" he said, his voice dropping, gentler. "Why are you sorry?" Her eyes opened a crack, unfocused, staring past him into the storm. "I made it hard." "You didn't," he said, the words coming faster now, anger rising, not at her, but at whoever had let her believe that. "You didn't make anything hard. You're a kid. You're supposed to be safe." Rex barked again, shorter this time, and pushed forward, urging them on. Jake folded the note and shoved it into his own pocket, like he could keep it from disappearing, like he could keep her from disappearing. The rail spur angled slightly, and the wind shifted with it, hitting them from the side. Jake's boot slipped once on a hidden patch of ice, and he caught himself with a sharp breath. His knee screamed. He didn't stop. Pain could wait. Everything could wait. Mia's hand had found a handful of Rex's fur when the dog moved close. Her fingers clung weakly at the thick hair near his collar, as if she understood, even half-conscious, that the dog was the reason she was still breathing. "Good," Jake murmured. "Hold on to him. He's stubborn. He doesn't quit." Ahead, the rails dipped into a lower stretch where the snow had drifted high between the ties. Rex slowed, sniffing, then stopped and lifted his head. His ears perked, not forward this time, but slightly to the left. Jake followed his gaze, squinting into the whiteness. The air felt colder there. He couldn't see the lake, but he could feel its open expanse, like a dark thought at the edge of the world. Somewhere out there, ice groaned under pressure, shifting and settling with a sound so low most people would miss it. Rex made a soft, uneasy rumble in his chest. Jake tightened his arms around Mia and forced himself onward. The rails were still there beneath the snow, but the wind was getting meaner, the drifts deeper, the path less certain. Every step felt heavier than the last. He looked down at Mia's face. Her lashes were white with frost, her cheeks too pale, her mouth barely moving with each breath. "Listen to me," he said, close to her ear. "We're getting you out. I don't care what anyone said. I don't care what you heard. You're coming home." Mia's lips trembled. A whisper slipped out, so faint Jake almost missed it. "Don't take me back." Jake froze for half a heartbeat, the words landing in his mind like a warning flare. Back where? Back to the house? Back to whoever she was afraid of? Back to the place that made a 9-year-old write, "I'm sorry," like it was her final sentence? Rex started forward again, urgent now, pulling the leash taut. Jake followed, but his chest felt tight, not from cold. From the sudden awful realization that surviving the storm might be the simpler part of this story. Behind them, the search teams kept sweeping their grids. Ahead of them, the rail line disappeared into a wall of blowing white, and somewhere to the left, under all that snow and silence, the lake ice groaned again. Deeper this time, like the earth itself was shifting. The rail spur should have been their salvation. Straight lines usually were. In weather like this, anything that didn't curve or disappear felt like mercy. But as Jake pushed forward, he realized the rails were guiding them toward something colder, something heavier in the air. The wind coming off the lake wasn't just stronger, it was sharper, carrying a damp bite that crept through layers and settled deep in the bones. Rex slowed, his movements less confident now. He kept glancing left, then back at Jake, then forward again, as if weighing two bad options. The dog's tail was low, stiff, not from fear, but from caution. Jake knew that posture. Rex wasn't panicking, he was warning. "It's all right," Jake muttered, though his breath was ragged. "We just need a little more ground." Mia sagged against his chest. Her head lolled, then jerked faintly, as if her body couldn't decide whether to stay awake or let go. Jake adjusted his hold again, tucking her closer, trying to shield her face from the wind. His arms were burning now. Not the clean burn of exercise, but the dull ache of muscles pushed past what they wanted to give. The rails dipped slightly, angling down toward a stretch where the snow looked different. Smoother, less drifted. Jake recognized it too late. Wind-scoured ice, the kind that hid danger under a thin, deceptive skin. Rex stopped abruptly and turned sideways, blocking Jake's path. He let out a low, insistent sound, deeper than a bark. "I see it," Jake said, his heart thudding. "I see it." He tried to step around Rex, searching for firmer footing, but the wind shoved him sideways. His boot slid, skidded across the ice, and suddenly there was nothing solid beneath him at all. The world tipped. Jake's foot shot forward instinctively, but it found no purchase. His knee slammed down hard, pain exploding up his leg. He went forward, twisting to keep Mia from hitting the ground, and felt the terrifying sensation of sliding toward open space. A crack echoed beneath the snow. Not loud. Worse, a low, splitting sound that vibrated through his bones. Rex lunged. The dog's jaws clamped onto the thick fabric of Jake's jacket just below the shoulder, teeth biting down with controlled force. The impact wrenched Jake back hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs. He slammed against the packed snow between the rails, chest heaving, heart racing. For a second, everything went still. Then the ice beneath where Jake had been standing gave way completely, collapsing into a jagged hole that disappeared into darkness. Frigid air rushed up from below, carrying the smell of open water and old metal. If Rex had been a second slower, Jake knew exactly where they would be. He lay there, shaking, Mia pressed tight against him, Rex braced and growling softly at the hole as if daring it to try again. "Good boy," Jake gasped, his voice breaking despite himself. "Good boy." He scrambled backward on his elbows, dragging himself and Mia away from the edge. Rex didn't release his grip until Jake was safely clear, then immediately repositioned himself between them and the danger, body rigid, eyes locked on the broken ice. Jake forced himself upright, every movement screaming protest. His knee throbbed with each shift of weight. He tested it quickly. It held, barely. Mia stirred, a faint whimper escaping her lips. "It's loud," she murmured, eyes still closed. "I know," Jake said, brushing snow from her hair. "You're doing great. You hear me? You're doing great." But the truth pressed down on him harder than the wind. The rails had led them into a trap. Going back the way they came meant crossing the same ice again, with less light and less strength. Going forward meant skirting the lake's edge, where the snow hid fractures and thin spots like teeth under a smile. Jake looked around, breathing hard. The storm had thickened, the snow falling faster now, blowing sideways in sheets. Visibility shrank to a few yards at best. The idea of waiting it out crossed his mind, just for a moment, and he crushed it immediately. Waiting meant freezing. Waiting meant letting the cold decide. Rex turned his head suddenly and barked once, sharp and directional, then trotted a few steps to the right, away from the rails, toward a darker line barely visible through the snow. Trees. Jake followed Rex's gaze. A strip of land rose slightly there, dotted with scrub and half-buried brush. Not safe, but safer than ice. His decision settled in his chest with the weight of finality. "All right," he said, voice steady despite the chaos inside him. "We're leaving the tracks." He shifted Mia carefully, gritting his teeth as pain shot through his knee, and stepped off the rail bed. The snow was deeper here, grabbing at his legs, but it felt solid beneath his boots. Rex moved ahead, nose low, checking each step, slowing whenever the ground changed. They made it several yards when Mia's hand slipped from Rex's fur and fell limp against Jake's chest. "No," Jake said sharply. "Stay with me." Her eyes didn't open this time. Her breathing was so shallow he had to press his ear close to feel it. Panic surged, hot and sudden. He wanted to shout, to scream for help, but the storm would swallow it. He was acutely aware of how small they were out here, how easily a life could vanish without anyone noticing. Rex stopped again and looked back, ears high, eyes intent. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He simply waited, as if telling Jake that standing still was not an option. Jake swallowed hard and forced his legs to move. Somewhere ahead, hidden beyond the veil of snow, there had to be something. A road, a building, a machine. Anything that meant warmth and people and light. Behind them, the broken ice groaned again, deeper this time, as if reminding Jake how close they'd come. And as Jake pushed forward into the trees, carrying a child who felt lighter with every step, he understood that the storm wasn't the only thing trying to pull them under. The trees broke the wind, but they didn't bring relief. Snow clung heavier here, thick and uneven, grabbing at Jake's boots like it didn't want to let him pass. His knee throbbed with every step, a deep, hot pain that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He kept his jaw clenched, breathing through his nose, refusing to let the pain climb any higher than it already had. Mia was too still. Jake adjusted her again, trying to coax a response without jostling her too much. Her head rested against his shoulder, her cheek cold even through the layers of fabric. He leaned his face close to hers, close enough to feel the faintest brush of breath. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Just stay." Rex moved ahead, slower now, checking each patch of ground, circling fallen branches before leading Jake around them. The dog's confidence hadn't vanished, but it had sharpened into something urgent, focused. Rex wasn't searching anymore. He was guiding. A sound cut through the storm that didn't belong to wind or ice. Jake froze, straining to hear it again. There it was. A low engine hum, distant, muffled, but real. Rex's ears snapped up. He turned sharply to the right and barked, not once but twice, loud and insistent, then took off through the trees in that direction. The leash jerked in Jake's hand, nearly pulling him off balance. "Rex!" Jake shouted, stumbling forward. "Wait!" But Rex didn't wait. He burst out of the tree line and into a narrow service road just as a set of headlights emerged from the white, cutting twin tunnels through the storm. The truck slowed abruptly, brakes groaning. Yellow lights flashed atop the cab, hazy through the snow. A city plow. Big, loud, real. Jake staggered out after Rex, waving one arm while keeping Mia tight against his chest. The truck rolled to a stop, engine idling, snow piling up against its massive tires. The driver's door cracked open, then opened wider. A man leaned out, bundled in a heavy coat and knit cap, his face lined and wary. "What the hell are you doing out here?" he shouted over the wind. "They called this search off." Jake pushed forward until he was close enough to be seen clearly. "She's hypothermic," he yelled back. "She won't make it without heat." The man's eyes dropped to Mia, then widened. He climbed down from the cab, boots crunching on ice. He took one look at her face and swore under his breath. "Jesus," he said, "how long's she been out?" "Too long," Jake replied. "I'm Jake, Marine Search and Rescue. This is Rex." The man nodded once, quick. "Tom Alvarez, City Public Works." He glanced back at his truck, then at the road behind him, disappearing into white. "They told us to pull back. Roads are getting bad. If I turn this rig around—" Rex stepped between them and barked, sharp and commanding. Not aggressive, insistent, as if the dog were making the argument Jake didn't have time to make. Tom looked down at Rex, then back at Mia. His jaw tightened. He exhaled slowly. "Get her in," he said. "Now." Jake didn't hesitate. Tom opened the passenger door, and a wave of warm air poured out, thick with the smell of diesel and coffee. Jake climbed up awkwardly, careful with his knee, and settled into the seat, keeping Mia cradled against him. Rex jumped up after them, curling immediately against Mia's legs, his body pressed tight. Tom slammed the door shut and climbed back into the driver's seat. He cranked the heat all the way up and reached behind him, grabbing a blanket from the back. "Wrap her," he said. "Head to." Jake did, tucking the blanket around Mia, rubbing her hands gently, trying to coax warmth back into fingers that barely moved. Rex shifted closer, his breathing steady and strong. The truck lurched forward as Tom turned it around, tires grinding against ice. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cab, there was sudden, blessed quiet. Mia stirred. Her eyes opened a fraction, unfocused, then found Jake's face. Her lips moved. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't take me back." The words landed heavy in the warm cab, heavier than the storm outside. Tom glanced over, concern flickering across his face. "Back where?" he asked quietly. Jake shook his head, unsure how to answer. He brushed a damp strand of hair from Mia's forehead. "We're just getting you safe," he said. "That's all." Mia's grip tightened weakly in Rex's fur. "They said—" "It was useless," she murmured. "That I wasn't worth it." Tom's hands clenched on the steering wheel. He said nothing, but his jaw worked as if he were chewing on something bitter. "Listen to me," Jake said softly, leaning closer. "You are not useless. You are not a burden. You hear me?" Her eyes fluttered, struggling to stay open. Rex lifted his head and gave a small, steady huff, warm breath washing over her hands. She leaned into him instinctively, like she trusted the dog more than the words. The truck hit a bump, jostling them slightly. Tom adjusted the wheel, guiding the plow through the whiteout. "We're heading to the ranger station," he said. "Closest place with heat and radios. It's a few minutes if the road holds." Jake nodded. His hands shook now, the adrenaline bleeding off, the weight of what almost happened settling into his bones. Behind them, the storm erased their tracks within seconds. Ahead of them, a strip of road stretched on through the snow, and for the first time since the cleared zone, Jake allowed himself a fragile, dangerous thing. Hope. The ranger station appeared out of the white, like a promise kept too late. A low building with lights burning warm against the storm, its outline softened by drifting snow. Tom pulled the plow in close and leaned on the horn. The sound cut through the wind, and moments later the front door flew open. Two rangers rushed out, coats half-zipped, faces tight with alarm when they saw Jake climbing down with a small, bundled figure in his arms. "We've got a hypothermia case," Jake said, his voice steady, despite the tremor in his hands. "Child, severe exposure." They didn't waste time asking questions. One ranger led the way inside, while the other radioed ahead, calling for medics. The blast of warm air hit Jake like a wall as he crossed the threshold, his breath fogging, his legs suddenly heavy, now that he didn't have to fight the wind. They laid Mia gently on a cot near a space heater. Someone wrapped her in thermal blankets. Another checked her pulse and nodded grimly. "She's alive," the ranger said. "Barely. Good job getting her here." Jake stepped back, his arms aching with the sudden emptiness. Rex stayed close, pressing his body against the cot, whining softly when a ranger tried to nudge him away. "Let him stay," Jake said immediately. "He's keeping her warm." The ranger hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but keep him calm." Rex settled, chin resting near Mia's knee, eyes never leaving her face. Jake sank onto a bench along the wall, the adrenaline draining out of him in a rush that left his hands shaking. His knee screamed now that it had time to complain. He ignored it, staring at Mia, counting her breaths. The door opened again, and a police officer stepped in, snow clinging to his coat. He held a clipboard and a folded flyer in his gloved hand. "That her?" the officer asked, voice low. Jake looked up. "That depends. Who are you looking for?" The officer unfolded the flyer and held it out. A photo stared back at Jake. A school picture. Brown hair pulled back, a shy smile missing one tooth. Mia. "She was reported missing earlier this evening," the officer said. "Name's Mia Lawson, 9 years old. Last seen at a temporary shelter near West 2nd. Parents thought she wandered off." Jake's jaw tightened. "She didn't wander," he said quietly. "She ran." The officer blinked. "Ran? From where?" Before Jake could answer, one of the rangers spoke up, glancing at the intake notes. "She wasn't at home when the storm hit. She was brought to a warming center, but left on her own." The officer frowned. Left how? Jake stood slowly, every movement deliberate. Because she thought no one wanted her there. The room went quiet except for the hum of heaters and the distant howl of wind outside. The officer shifted his weight. That doesn't make sense. The shelter staff... She heard something, Jake interrupted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded paper, smoothing it carefully before handing it over. I found this in her coat. The officer unfolded it, his eyes scanning the smeared words. His mouth tightened. I'm sorry, he read. Aloud, then stopped. A medic arrived then, wheeling equipment through the door, followed by another. They moved with practiced urgency, checking Mia's temperature, her pulse, her pupils. Core temp is dangerously low, one of them said. We need to get her to the hospital. Now. As they worked, the officer stepped aside with a ranger, voices low but intense. We cleared that sector, the ranger said. Twice. And still missed her, the officer replied. Search teams pulled back because of conditions. Jake heard enough to know where this was going. He stepped closer. I took Rex off the grid, he said plainly. Against orders. The ranger looked at him, surprised. You what? He indicated, Jake said. I followed. The officer studied Jake for a long moment. You realize that's going to be an issue? Jake met his gaze without flinching. Write it up, he said. I'll sign it. The medic looked up sharply. If you hadn't followed that dog, this kid would be dead, she said. You can argue policy later. The officer held up a hand. We're not here to argue, he said. But his tone lacked conviction. Mia stirred then, a faint sound escaping her lips. Jake moved instantly to her side. Mia, he said softly, you're safe. We're taking you to the hospital. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy and confused. She looked around the room at the strangers, the lights, the uniforms. Her breathing quickened. Hey, Jake said quickly. Easy. You're okay? Her gaze landed on Rex. She reached out weakly, fingers curling into his fur. Her breathing slowed. I didn't mean to make trouble, she whispered, her voice thin. They said there were too many people missing, that it was pointless. Jake's chest tightened. Who said that? She swallowed. At the shelter, they were arguing. One of them said the storm was winning, that some kids don't make it. I thought if I left, it would be easier. The medic paused, her hands still. The officer looked away. You thought you were helping, Jake said gently. Mia nodded faintly. I didn't want to be the reason. No, Jake said, his voice firm now. You are never the reason. Do you hear me? Her eyes closed again, exhaustion pulling her under, but her hand stayed tangled in Rex's fur. As they lifted the stretcher and wheeled her toward the door, the ranger turned back to Jake. You'll need to make a statement. Jake nodded. After she's safe. Outside, the ambulance lights cut through the snow, red and blue reflections dancing across the white. Rex jumped down from the stretcher only when Jake commanded him to, watching as Mia was loaded inside. The officer stepped up beside Jake. You know, he said quietly, we had volunteers sweep that exact spot. No tracks, no signs. Jake stared into the storm. The wind erased the tracks, he said. But it didn't erase her. The officer followed his gaze, thoughtful now. Your dog found her by instinct. Jake nodded once. So did she, he said. She just ran in the wrong direction. As the ambulance doors closed and the siren faded into the storm, Jake stood with Rex at his side, the weight of the night settling over him. They had pulled her from the cold. Now they would have to face what she'd been running from. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and overheated air, a sharp contrast to the clean brutality of the storm outside. Jake sat on a plastic chair in the waiting area, his elbows on his knees. Rex curled at his feet, like a coiled shadow. The dog hadn't relaxed since they arrived. His ears flicked at every sound, every passing footstep, as if he were still on duty. Time moved strangely indoors. Minutes stretched thin, then vanished altogether. A nurse passed by once and told Jake Mia was stable, that her temperature was coming up slowly. Slowly was good. Slowly meant alive. Jake nodded, thanked her, and watched her disappear down the hall. Only then did he let himself breathe. The automatic doors slid open again, letting in a gust of cold air and a woman who looked like she'd been running for miles. Her hair was pulled back hastily, strands escaping and sticking to her wet cheeks. Her coat was half-zipped, one glove missing. Her eyes scanned the room wildly until they landed on the Marine uniform. She froze. For a moment, Jake saw what everyone else in the room seemed to see at the same time. An adult connected to the missing child. A suspect. A reason. The woman took a step forward, then another, hesitating as if she expected someone to stop her. "Is she—" Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Is Mia alive?" Jake stood. "Yes," he said simply. "She's stable." The woman's knees buckled. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself, one hand flying to her mouth as a sob broke free. Relief washed over her face so fast it almost hurt to witness. "Thank God," she whispered. "Thank God." People stared. Whispers moved through the waiting area like a draft. Jake could feel the judgment before anyone said a word. He recognized it. He'd seen it in disaster zones, in courtrooms, in places where people needed someone to blame so they didn't have to sit with the truth. A police officer approached, posture stiff. "Ma'am, we need to talk," he said, already sounding like he'd made up his mind. The woman nodded quickly. "I know," she said. "I know. I'm Sarah. I'm her stepmom." The word landed hard in the room. Stepmom. Jake felt it shift the air, give people a shape to hang their assumptions on. "Where were you when she left the shelter?" the officer asked. Sarah swallowed. "Trying to find her," she said. "I realized she was gone maybe 10 minutes after the argument. I called it in right away." "What argument?" the officer pressed. Sarah closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet, but steady. "It wasn't about her," she said. "Not directly, but kids don't know the difference." Jake felt Rex shift at his feet, sensing the tension. Sarah drew a breath. The shelter was overcrowded. The storm was getting worse. People were scared. One of the volunteers said they needed to focus on the strongest chances, that some searches would have to wait until morning. The officer frowned. "You're saying someone said they'd stop looking?" "I'm saying someone said some kids don't make it through nights like this," Sarah replied. Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. "I argued. I told them they couldn't say things like that where children could hear. But Mia was standing right there. She heard everything." Jake's chest tightened. "She'd already been quiet all evening," Sarah continued. "Her dad and we're figuring things out. She's been carrying more than she should. When I turned back, she was gone." The officer scribbled something on his pad. "And you let her leave?" Sarah looked up sharply. "I didn't let her do anything," she said, anger flaring for the first time. "I failed to stop her." Silence settled over the room. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Jake stepped forward. "She thought she was helping," he said. All eyes turned to him. "She thought leaving would make things easier for the adults." Sarah's hand flew to her chest. "She said that?" Her voice broke. "Oh, God." Jake nodded once. "She left a note." Sarah covered her face, shoulders shaking. When she looked up again, tears streaked her cheeks. But there was something else there, too. Resolve. "I should have been louder," she said, the words falling into the quiet room like a confession. I should have shut it down harder. I should have made sure she knew she mattered more than any argument. The officer shifted, his tone softening. "She's alive," he said. "That's what matters right now." Sarah nodded, wiping her face. Her gaze drifted to Rex, who had risen and was watching her carefully. She crouched slowly, extending a trembling hand. "Thank you," she whispered, not to Jake, but to the dog. Rex sniffed her fingers, then allowed her to touch his head. He stayed calm, assessing, as if deciding whether this human belonged in the circle of trust. The doors at the end of the hall opened, and a nurse appeared. "She's awake," she said. "For a few minutes, she's asking for the dog." Jake felt something loosen inside his chest. "Can we?" he asked. The nurse nodded. "Briefly." Sarah looked at Jake, hope and fear tangled in her eyes. "May I come?" Jake considered her for a moment, then nodded. "She needs to see you." Inside the room, Mia lay small beneath warmed blankets, her cheeks no longer blue, color slowly returning. Her eyes found Rex immediately, and a faint smile curved her lips. "You came," she whispered, her fingers reaching. Rex padded forward and placed his chin gently on the edge of the bed. Mia's hand tangled in his fur, holding tight. Sarah stepped closer, stopping just short of the bed. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm here." Mia looked at her, uncertain. "I didn't want to make it worse," she said. Sarah knelt, tears spilling freely now. "You didn't?" she said. "I'm so sorry you ever thought that. I should have protected you better." Mia studied her face, then reached out with her free hand and touched Sarah's sleeve, tentative but real. Rex watched them both, unmoving. In that small room, with machines humming quietly and the storm still raging outside, something shifted. Not everything was fixed, not even close. But for the first time since the cleared zone, Jake believed that Mia wasn't alone anymore. The storm burned itself out sometime before dawn. By the time the sky lightened to a thin, colorless gray, Duluth looked stunned and quiet, as if the city itself were catching its breath. Snowbanks stood where streets had been, and tree branches sagged under the weight of the night. The wind had moved on, leaving behind a world rearranged. Jake stood near the hospital window with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. Rex lay at his feet, finally relaxed, eyes half closed, but ears still alert. Down the hall, voices drifted in low tones. Paperwork, reports, the machinery that followed survival. A police captain approached Jake, a folder tucked under his arm. He was older, gray at the temples, the kind of man who'd seen enough to know when not to pretend things were simple. "We reviewed the search logs," the captain said. "The teams followed procedure. Grids were cleared the way they're supposed to be." Jake nodded once. He wasn't interested in arguing. He'd already made peace with the write-up, the questions, the raised eyebrows. "There's something else," the captain continued. He opened the folder and held out a printed map, marked with lines and timestamps. "One of the volunteers reported seeing a piece of yellow fabric near the trees. A scarf, maybe. He logged it, but didn't break formation to check." Jake felt a familiar heaviness settle in his chest. "Why not?" he asked. The captain sighed. He didn't want to disrupt the line, didn't want to slow the sweep. He assumed someone else closer to the center would handle it. Jake looked at the map. The spot was circled now, neat and red, the same place Rex had stopped without hesitation. Tracks were gone within minutes, the captain said. The wind erased everything. On paper, it looked clean. "On paper," Jake repeated quietly. The captain studied Rex, who lifted his head slightly, sensing the attention. "Your dog changed direction before he found the glove," he said. "Before there was anything to see." Jake nodded. "Rex wasn't looking for tracks," he said. "He was looking for her." The captain closed the folder. "We're recommending a commendation," he said, "for you and the K9. Jake didn't respond right away. He glanced down the hall toward Mia's room, where the door was cracked open and soft light spilled out. "That's not why we went out there," he said. "I know," the captain replied, "but sometimes it matters that someone writes down what really happened." Later that morning, Jake stood beside Mia's bed again. She looked smaller now that the danger had passed, swallowed by pillows and blankets, but there was color in her cheeks and clarity in her eyes. Rex sat close, head resting on the mattress, his presence steady and familiar. A nurse smiled as she adjusted a monitor. "She's a tough one," she said. "Doctors think she'll make a full recovery." Mia's fingers curled into Rex's fur. "He didn't get scared," she said softly. "No," Jake replied. "He doesn't scare easy." She looked up at Jake, serious. "He heard me," she said, "before I talked." Jake swallowed. "I think he did." Sarah stood nearby, hands folded tight, listening. There was no performance in her face now. No need to convince anyone. Just a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. "I talked to the shelter director," Sarah said. "There are changes coming, training, rules about what gets said around kids. It won't fix everything, but—" She trailed off. "But it's a start," Jake said. Mia nodded. "I don't want people to say those things anymore," she said. "Not where kids can hear." "They won't," Sarah said, her voice firm. "I promise you. And if they do, I'll be louder." Mia considered this, then reached for Sarah's hand. She didn't let go of Rex with the other. Outside, reporters gathered as the day went on. Cameras, questions, headlines that tried to fit the night into something tidy. Jake answered what he could and deflected the rest. He didn't correct them when they called him a hero. He didn't argue when they focused on the uniform. When one reporter asked what made Rex stop, what made him turn when train teams moved on, Jake paused. "Instinct," he said finally. "Sometimes you can do everything right and still miss what matters. Rex didn't follow the map. He followed the heartbeat." That line made the rounds. It would be quoted, misquoted, trimmed down to fit a screen. Jake knew that too. Words had a way of becoming smaller once they left your mouth. Before he left, Jake returned to the lakefront park with Rex. The storm had smoothed the ground into something deceptively peaceful. The bench was visible again, dusted with snow. The trees stood quiet, keeping their secrets. Jake stopped where Rex had first refused to move. He looked around, imagining how empty it had been, how easy it would have been to walk past. Rex sniffed the air once, then sat, calm now. The job was done. Jake rested a hand on the dog's head. "Good boy," he said, not as praise, but as truth. Somewhere behind them, the city resumed its routines. Plows cleared roads, people shoveled driveways. Life folded the storm into memory. But for one child, one Marine, and one stubborn dog, the night would never shrink into just weather. It would remain what it had always been. A reminder, search teams had followed the rules and missed her. A K9 followed instinct and found her. And because of that, a little girl who believed she didn't matter learned that she did. Before you go, let me ask you something simple. Do you believe instinct can save a life when rules fail? If this story moved you, type 1 in the comments. If you believe that dog felt her heartbeat before anyone saw her, type 0. You don't need to write a sentence, just one number. Sometimes that's enough to let us know you were here, and that this story mattered to you. And if you want to hear more true stories like this, stories about courage, quiet heroes, and the moments that change lives forever, take a second and subscribe to the channel. Because there are more stories waiting, and the next one might just stay with you longer than you expect.